What if you were never alone and never knew it? Picture yourself walking through a frozen forest 40,000 years ago. The cold cuts deep into your bones, hunger gnaws at your gut, and somewhere along the tree line something watches you. Not a wolf, not a bear. A face broad, heavy-browed, unmistakably human. Almost these beings were here long before Homo sapiens spread across every corner of the earth with sharp tools and sharper instincts. Then, one by one, they vanished. The Neanderthals, the Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, Homo luzonensis, Homo naledi, an entire human family wiped from existence, and we somehow survived every single extinction that swallowed them whole. This was never just our world. It was shared, contested, and full of creatures that looked into fire the same way we do. So the real question isn't whether other humans existed, it's why only we are still standing. If this already has you questioning everything, just wait, because what comes next involves volcanoes, half Neanderthal children, and interspecies romance that rewrote human history forever. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling us which extinct human fascinates you most, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens took its first breath on African soil. But here's what most people never stop to think about. We were not alone, not even close. While our ancestors were just beginning to find their footing, Neanderthals had already been ruling Europe and Western Asia for hundreds of thousands of years. Denisovans stretched across Eastern Asia. Homo erectus still held on in scattered corners of the continent. And deep in the islands of Southeast Asia, a tiny people we now call Homo floresiensis, the hobbits of human evolution, were living out lives completely unknown to us. And that's not all. There was also Homo naledi, a species with a brain no bigger than an orange, yet evidence suggests they were deliberately carrying their dead into deep cave systems, a behavior we once thought was uniquely ours. At one single point in prehistory, 6 or 7 distinct human species may have walked this earth at the same time. Let that sink in. Because these were not mindless creatures driven purely by survival instinct. The Neanderthals buried their dead, used colored pigments, crafted jewelry from eagle talons, mastered fire, and cared for their wounded. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, scientists found the remains of a Neanderthal man with a withered arm, a damaged eye socket, and severe arthritis. He should not have survived, but he did well into old age. Someone fed him. Someone stayed beside him. That is not instinct. That is compassion. These were people, ancient, complex, feeling human beings doing everything they could to survive in an unforgiving world. And yet, every single one of them disappeared. What happened to them, and what role did we play in it? 70,000 years ago, Homo sapiens walked out of Africa and into a world that was already full. These were not empty lands waiting to be discovered. These were territories that other human species had called home for hundreds of thousands of years, lands they knew, hunted, and survived in long before we ever set foot there. And yet everywhere modern humans went, something deeply unsettling followed close behind. The pattern is impossible to ignore. Neanderthals vanished around 40,000 years ago, right after Homo sapiens flooded into Europe. Homo floresiensis disappeared approximately 50,000 years ago, precisely when modern humans reached Southeast Asia. Homo erectus in Java, gone. Every timeline of arrival lines up with a timeline of disappearance, and that consistency is not comfortable to sit with. But this was not a war. There are no mass Neanderthal graveyards, no archaeological evidence of organized slaughter. The truth is quieter, and in many ways far more haunting. Homo sapiens carried advantages that were almost invisible: longer-range weapons, more complex language, wider social networks, and trade routes stretching hundreds of miles. We were simply better connected, better equipped, and better at adapting. When ancient human populations were slowly pushed into marginal lands, cut off from resources and from each other, their numbers didn't collapse in a single moment. They faded, slowly, silently, small groups becoming smaller, until one generation passed without a next one following. Extinction, in this case, didn't arrive with fire and screaming. It arrived like a last breath in the dark, with no one there to witness it. And yet, the story doesn't end there. Because before they disappeared, something happened between us and them that science is only now beginning to fully understand. But surviving in the ancient world was never just about being smarter or more adaptable than the competition. The planet itself was working against every human species alive. between 70,000 and 12,000 years ago. Earth was going through cycles of violence that are almost impossible to picture from where we stand today. Glaciers swallowed entire continents. Sea levels dropped over 100 meters. Landscapes that supported life in one millennium became frozen wastelands in the next. The world was not a stable home, it was a constantly shifting trap. For Homo sapiens, with our large brains, complex social networks, and remarkable flexibility, these conditions were brutal but survivable. For species with smaller populations, more localized territories, and less cognitive range, the same environmental swings could mean total collapse. The playing field was never equal, and the climate made sure of that. Then came Toba, approximately 74,000 years ago. A supervolcano beneath what is now Indonesia erupted on a scale almost beyond comprehension. The resulting volcanic winter may have lasted years, sunlight blocked, temperatures plummeting, food chains shattering from the ground up. Some researchers believe this single event pushed every human species on Earth to the very edge of extinction simultaneously. Modern genetic evidence suggests Homo sapiens survived with a population that may have dropped to just a few thousand individuals. Every single person alive on this planet today descends from that impossibly small group of survivors. We almost didn't make it, and if we, the most adaptable human species that ever existed, barely held on, what chance did smaller, more isolated populations have against the same catastrophe? That question leads somewhere deeply unsettling. And then there are the island species, and they deserve their own moment, because nothing quite prepares you for what isolation does to human evolution. Homo floresiensis, discovered on the Indonesian island of Flores, stands as one of the most astonishing findings in the entire history of paleoanthropology. These were tiny humans, barely a meter tall, with brains roughly the size of a chimpanzee's, and yet they manufactured stone tools and hunted pygmy elephants. Let that land for a second. A creature with a chimpanzee-sized brain, crafting its own tools, coordinating hunts against elephants, even miniature ones. Everything we think we understand about brain size and intelligence, about what it takes to be a capable, thinking human being. Homo floresiensis quietly challenges all of it. Island biogeography explains how they got there. When large animals become stranded on islands with limited resources, evolution tends to shrink them across generations. An ancestral Homo erectus population, trapped on Flores and evolving in complete isolation for hundreds of thousands of years, became something entirely new. Then there is Homo luzonensis, found in the Philippines and even more recently discovered, even more deeply mysterious. A small-bodied species carrying a strange, contradictory mix of primitive and modern anatomical features that simply doesn't fit any existing category. Known from just a handful of bone fragments and teeth, it was probably there for a very long time, and then, like so many others, it wasn't. Every decade, paleoanthropologists dig up something that forces us to rewrite what we thought we knew about human evolution and ancient human diversity. The human family tree wasn't a straight line. It was a sprawling, tangled, breathtaking web, and some of its branches we are only now beginning to discover. So what was the decisive edge? The most compelling answer science has found is behavioral modernity. Somewhere between 50 and 70,000 years ago, something fundamental shifted in the way Homo sapiens operated. The archaeological record suddenly fills with cave paintings, musical instruments, long-distance trade networks, highly specialized tools, and unmistakable evidence of symbolic thinking and complex forward planning. Something clicked, and it changed everything about what our species was capable of. Language likely became recursive, able to build ideas inside of ideas, express hypotheses, describe things that weren't physically present, plan for futures that hadn't happened yet. And once that threshold was crossed, coordination with large groups of strangers became possible. Knowledge could be transmitted across generations with precision, meaning every generation inherited a slightly more advanced starting point than the one before. This is what researchers call the cognitive revolution, and no other human species appears to have crossed that line in the same way. But the full picture is darker than that. There was violence. Neanderthal remains carry the marks of it. There were diseases that modern humans carried out of Africa, spreading into populations that had no immunity whatsoever. The same devastating dynamic that would later collapse indigenous American populations after European contact, the disappearance of every other human species, wasn't caused by one thing. It was climate instability, cognitive competition, population fragmentation, interbreeding, disease, and raw bad luck, all hitting simultaneously. We were not inevitable. We were one experiment among many. The Neanderthals were people. The Denisovans were people. The tiny hunters of Flores were people. And the experiment that succeeded wasn't necessarily the most deserving. It was simply the one that had the right tools, the right networks, and the right timing. Which raises a question that cuts much deeper than ancient history. The Neanderthals looked out at their world and had every reason to believe they would always be part of it. They had fire, they had community, they had tens of thousands of years of accumulated survival knowledge written into their bones and their culture, and then they were gone. That is not a small thought. That is one of the heaviest truths this planet holds, and you just sat with it. If this video reached something inside you, if it made you see human history differently, subscribe to this channel right now, because this is exactly the kind of story we tell here. And comment still here below, because if you made it to the end of this, you are exactly who this channel was made for. That comment means more than you know. Leave a like if this changed how you think about what it means to be human, and watch the next video on the screen right now. The story is far from over.